Baba, be with us, be with dear Vesta tonight and all of us. Yeah, Jai Baba.
Well, like I said, I'm so happy to see Elizabeth, but I've adopted Brad and Hunter as my nephews. I just love Brad and Hunter too. You are so gentle and loving and kind. Thank you for your messages of love. You all have no idea what it's like to have the world come into my house when I haven't been out in the world for 2 years. It's like I feel like Muhammad in the mountains coming to me right now. So it's been sweet amongst all the stress and everything. So thank all of you. And as you can tell, I'm a little, what do you call it? I'm a little emotionally vulnerable. So when I talk about how I have come to see how Baba prepared me to come to him without reservation from the moment I was born, it's a happy story for me to recall this. So anyway, I was born to a Norwegian immigrant mother, and my father's family came over on the Mayflower. But once I realized the history of what happened when the Mayflower landed in this land and the native population and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that's true. I rarely say anything about my family being on the Mayflower, just because it's a little embarrassing. But anyway, even though I had nothing to do with that, I don't even want to have anything remotely to do with it. So that's my mom was, when they came, they settled in the northwest corner of North Dakota, up by the Canadian border. I'm okay. And my dad's family was in Minnesota area, in St. Paul. And my dad's family were very well off, like industrialists and business people, but they lost everything when the market crashed in 29 and 30. So my dad went from living in a mansion on the lake to literally living on a train station track, not the track, but what's the train station, I guess, the platform. And he and his brother would go down to the train tracks where these big German and Irish men were working in the slaughterhouses and then packing all the meat up in the train cars to send it out. And so what they would do is they would butcher and then hang the butchered animals to bleed out. And my dad and his brother would go, and my dad was born in 21. So my dad was 10, his brother was like 12. So they'd sit and watch all this happen. And my father, who was thin and kind of a smaller boy, he would run and grab scraps off the wooden planks of the floor and then put them in a bag that they had, because then they would carry it back to the train platform. And my grandmother always had a big cauldron of soup on, and they would always add this for flavor and nutrition into the soup. And one of the stories that Mehera loved for me to tell to her repeatedly was how my dad and his family survived from wealth to abject poverty and, living kind of hand to mouth for the first few years of the Depression. And one of the stories she liked the most was about how they were enterprising to figure out how to feed the family. And some of these guys felt bad for my parents. So every now and then they'd pass over potatoes or a couple of carrots or an onion and tell them to put it in their pocket and take it home and add it to the soup. But this is a story that Mehera found fascinating. My dad and his brother, my uncle, were going home from the train tracks. And you had to go around the train tracks. You just didn't go up to the platform. You had to go around and through a residential area to get to the entrance to the platform. And as they were going home through this neighborhood, in those days, when you would bake cakes and pies and stuff, there was a wooden shelf outside the window, and that's where you would cool the pie or the cake before you'd cut it or eat it. And they're walking by this house down the street, and they spot this pie. And they can tell by the bubbling up through the forks in the crust that it's a blueberry pie. And my dad loved blueberries. It was his favorite pie. So whenever there was blueberries, my mom always made sure he had blueberry pie. So they stop and they look at this pie and they're drooling because they haven't had anything like this, because during the Depression and everything, there was rationing on sugar and butter and everything. So if you were going to make a pie, it meant you saved sometimes for a couple of months to have enough sugar, enough butter, to get enough flour, etc. So they devised a plan. And my Uncle Fred says to my dad, Jack, I'm going to go knock on the front door. And when the woman leaves the kitchen to answer the door, grab that pie and start running. And then I'll join you. So there's a knock on the door, and my dad's looking into the kitchen window, and he sees the woman leave, and he knows now's the time to grab the pie. So he stands up on his tippy toes and he reaches up and he grabs the pie, holds the pie, and he starts running. And when the door answers, he said, his brother said, oh, sorry, wrong house. So they go back to the train tracks, they get up to the platform, and they're so thrilled that they brought home this blueberry pie, that they haven't had any treats like this. They haven't even had bread for a long time, just this watered down soup. And so they're constantly hungry. So my dad was so proud. He says, look at Dad, look what I got. We got a pie, a blueberry pie. And my grandpa says, well, where did you get that pie? He says, it was on the cooling rack outside this woman's window. And Fred told me to pinch it and we could bring it home and eat it and enjoy it after dinner. Oh, my grandpa went nuts. He grabbed the pie and he slapped both the boys, and he grabbed them. He had put the pie in Fred, because he was the older boy, in his hands, and he had him by the ears. And he says, take me back to the house where you stole this from. My uncle and my father were horrified, because now they were going to be completely humiliated. And mind you, they came from privilege and money. So they've never had to steal anything before. And they always knew that stealing was just a horrible thing and only bad people stole. So they're facing their own humiliation, and Fred's holding the pie, and my grandpa saying, don't you dare drop that pie, don't you dare drop that pie. So they go up to the woman's house, and my grandpa knocks on the door. She opens the door, and he says, my sons have something to give to you. And the woman looks, and she says, oh, you stole the pie I made for my family. And my father starts crying. And he always told me, he says, I was always the weepy one. I was the one that, you could hurt my feelings and yada, yada, yada. So my father starts crying. And the woman goes down and she pats him on the head. And she said, because you were so honest and you admitted that you stole from me, take the pie home and enjoy it. So Mehera loved that story. And she always said that woman reminded her of how the Hindus always saw a stranger coming to your house. You always gave them bakshish, something, whether it was a few coins, a little bit of rice, some rice and dal in a bowl, that you gave it to them regardless of what they looked like or what their status looked like or any of that type of thing, because they believed you didn't know how God was going to present himself to you. And he could come in the form of a stranger to your house and knock on your door. So she always loved that story. So, and my mom, her family settled in the northwest corner, just 13 miles south of the Canadian border. No, it's okay. South of the Canadian border. I'm going to give her a treat and hope she goes in the other food. Okay. Here, Persia. Here you go, little girl. Okay. There you go. And so they had a pretty tough life. because what their family did, and this is another thing that Mehera loved about my family, especially my mom's side of the family, is before they built a house to live in, they built a church to thank God for safe passage to the States. And so she always loved that about my family. And then they stayed in the church for a while until their farmhouses were built, but they farmed in, very severe weather up by the Canadian border. Now, here's something when I've been reflecting on my family, especially knowing Baba ran World War II. My family was part of the leadership of running the resistance in Norway. One of my aunts had an SS officer living in her house after her husband and sons were taken by the Nazis. And she was left with my cousin Agnes and her brother Thor in the house because they were too young to be put in the work camps. I think they were like 8 and 6, Agnes being the younger. And one of the things I realized, if Baba was managing World War II, he chose my mom's side of the family to help with the resistance to the Nazis and the hatred and, that type of thing. And they literally saved hundreds and hundreds of Jewish women and men, but a lot of children through their work. But they knew my aunt was a drop-off point for messages, but they didn't know how she knew to let the resistance workers drop the message off at her house, at the farmhouse, when the Nazi officer was gone. So they just positioned this officer in the house during the day, but he was a drinker. And my aunt would feed him food, and then the kids had to sit and watch him eat stew and bread when all they got was gruel or bread with, stale bread that he wasn't eating with a little bit of butter. So they were hungry all the time. So Mehera always would say, oh, how Baba took care of World War II, he used your family to help with the war. So I thought that was interesting, but it went way over my head at the time. I mean, sometimes I would listen to Mehera, and I'm ashamed to say this, but this is the truth. I was so young and naive and stupid and spiritually ignorant that I just would listen to her, but I didn't so much take it in because I was wondering when she was going to be finished visiting with me so I could go be with Goher and Arnavaz or work in the dispensary. That was my whole focus. So I missed a lot of stuff that's now just kind of coming up and coming into my awareness. But one of the things that my family did is they found out from one of the messages that Hitler was sending for heavy water, and I don't remember where he was getting it from, but it was coming through Norway. And he was going to use this heavy water to make the H-bomb. And when they found that out, they realized that when the train came, it's going to have to go on the ferry or however it was being transported. And it was the same ferry that they would put their wives and children on to go to school. And long story short, they knew if that water reached Germany and Hitler was able to be successful in creating this bomb, that they'd all end up speaking German and be under Nazi rule. And so they had to weigh blowing up this ferry with family members on it because they didn't want the water to get there. And I don't know all the facts of this. I'm kind of giving you the concept of it. But that's how dedicated resistance workers were in the face of incredible hatred and violence and just disgusting behavior. So Mehera always liked my mom's family because she always said, you come by your bravery honestly, this and that. So anyway, so that's just a little bit of history of my background. Now, also, my father was at, what's the name of the place in Hawaii where the Japanese bombed? What was that? Sorry? Yeah, my dad was at Pearl Harbor. And my mom was Rosie the Riveter at Lockheed out in Burbank because she had left the farm during World War II, the beginning, to come out and work in the war effort. So she left the farm and came out to California, and she was living with her sister, who was also here. And instead of spending bus money, which was probably 25 cents to go from Glendale to Burbank, it was maybe 10 miles, if that much. She walked that, no, it wasn't 10 miles. It was, she said 3.5 miles. So it was 3.5 miles that she walked every morning just to save bus money so that she would have more money to send back to the farms. So they had money to buy food and make up for all the stuff that was going on during the Depression. And because she was so smart and had run, you know, the crop rotations, counting all the grain that was taken in and doing all that stuff, she was really good at accounting and planning and budgeting and all that stuff. She was quickly made a manager at Lockheed, and she worked there until the war ended. So after the war ended, everybody was in kind of a celebratory mood. And in 1948, she and her sorority sisters, she and her sorority sisters would go dancing. And there was a famous place to dance called the Green Hotel, Green Hotel in Pasadena, because Benny Goodman would play there, the Ink Spots, Tommy Dorsey, all of the Dorsey brothers bands there. A good place to know where to go dance. So that's where she meets my father. And they were married. No. I'm so sorry. I don't know. Go lay down. Can you go lay down? Go lay down. Go lay down. So anyway, she meets my father, and then I was born. They get married August 15th. August 4th. I'm not sure what to do right now.
Vesta, you said celebratory, so the dog celebrated.
There you go. So they were married in 49 on August 5th, and I was born in 1950 on September 18th. And even as a child, as a small child, and I'm talking my first memory that Sojourner, go lay down, go lay down, go lay down, go lay down. Where was I? Oh, I had kind of an unusual ability. You know, when children, you know, haven't been scarred by life, so there's still an innocence of them. This is the last one. Go. I used to know things were going to happen, and I used to always tell my mom, such and such is going to happen, or da-da-da-da-da-da. Or when I was about 6 or 7, I said, Dad's going to bring home a dog named Prince tonight. And my mom would say, yeah. Sure enough, my dad was wrapping a movie that day, and there was a dog that was on the set all the time. And he didn't want to leave it because they were feeding it and giving it company. So he picks up the dog, and by God, the dog's name was Prince. So he pulls down the driveway and comes into the patio, and we go to the door to greet Dad. Now first is starting. I didn't do this last night. All right, go baby. So so we open the door to greet Dad. Oh, you're home, yay. And there's this dog, and he says, meet Prince, it's your new dog. So those kind of things happen. And when I was like 14 or 15, I told him, I said, you better go see Uncle Fred. That was his brother. I said, because I had a dream last night, he's going to have a heart attack and die tomorrow. And my dad and my mom had learned that when I said something like that, it wasn't said lightly. And I never had any like, oh, I'm having a premonition or anything. It was just normal and natural to me. It hadn't been beaten out of me yet. So he went and saw his brother that night, and sure enough, a call came the next morning that he had a massive heart attack driving on the way to work. So those kind of things were normal. They didn't seem abnormal to me or out of the usual. And I actually thought it happened to everybody. And my family, we never talked about it. But in church, because we were going to the Lutheran Church of America, which was really like the crazy evangelicals today. They always would tell my parents that she's possessed and she has the devil and you need to work on an exorcism for her and get this evilness out of her, yada, yada, yada. So my parents switched churches, thank goodness. But right after that, life had happened and I wasn't as innocent because the world had impacted me. And because I would argue with the minister after church service about, why do you talk about damnation and going to hell and fearing God and that kind of stuff? I said, when he's called the Prince of Peace, he died for us. Why is it that you want us to feel guilty about that? Why can't we feel his? I used to ask questions like that. And yeah, nice. Okay, Jack and Denora, do you have to bring it to church service? You can just drop it off for Sunday school. So, and then when the 60s hit and I was aware of Vietnam and what was going on with civil rights and the corruption in government, I was less than polite. And so I was no longer welcome in the church, which made me happy. So there was that. Now, the family house was built by my father's uncle, my great uncle, in 1932, which is the year Baba came to Hollywood. And my dad wasn't working in Hollywood at the time, but there was kind of that connection for the year. And I lived on a hill, and there was a canyon between us, and then another hill with a big water tank up on the top. And there was no cars or traffic because everybody was a one-car family, and the husband worked and drove the car. Drove the car to work. And the kids just stayed home and we played in the streets, we played stickball, we played hit the bat, ran around the hills. But one of the things I used to like to do, I don't know what to do. If I put her in my mom's room, she'll scratch the door to pieces. Go lay down, go lay down, go lay down, go lay down. Elizabeth, you want a Doberman? Anyway, one of the things I used to do is that little hill opposite the canyon from me was like a sanctuary when I was a little girl. No. When I was a little girl. And what I would do is I would walk around the water tank and I dance around the hills. And in my head, I imagined that God was dancing with me on the other end of the earth and that my feet were exactly over his feet. And my imagination was so active that I was careful with each step, that I made sure that God and I were simultaneously stepping. And I'd just sing songs. I'd sing a lot of hymns and I'd make up songs and stuff. So that was one thing, because I knew as a child from a very young age that God was on the earth. And one of the things that used to disturb people in the church is I said, Jesus has come back. He's on the earth. And you have to stop thinking of him as hanging on the cross, and you've got to go find him. That's part of the game of life. That's how I saw it. I saw it as a game because by whatever grace there was, that was my relationship with God. It was very intimate. It was friendly. It was sweet. It was playful, because that was, I wasn't very developed mentally and not educated at that time. This was just all my inner feelings. And I used to love going to church. And I had several friends who were of different denominations. And Catholic churches, most of them, almost all of them, are very elaborate inside. And I used to love looking at the paintings and the stained glass and everything. But one of the things that used to bother me was above the altar was a huge cross, and there was poor Jesus hanging off it, you know? And all I could think of is, he already gave his life and rose for the dead. Why are they keeping him up on the cross? Pull him the heck down from the cross. Let him live in your life. And so even with the priests that I found out later, because my friends' parents would call my parents and say, you know, your daughter, we enjoy her companionship with our daughter and everything, and we'll pick her up after church service is over. But the priests think that she's disturbing and countering what they're preaching from the pulpit. And my parents said, okay, that's fine. And so they stopped me from going to the Catholic Church because there were complaints from the priests about it. Here's this punk, you know, saying, take him off the cross. He's alive. Go find him. Live your life with him. You know, he's already risen, except that he's, you know, died for you. So why are you keeping him dead or half dead or dying? You know, it just didn't make any sense to the limited thinking of a limited mind, you know, of a child. So that was one thing. So obviously I was pretty precocious as a child. So it was after this, because I was old enough to understand that society and me didn't really mix very well. And now looking back, I was very kind of Eastern in my thought process of who God is and was, and our relationship with him. And the Western world, with its pedantic patriarchal beating, you know, especially after the war, you know, women were pregnant and barefoot and in the kitchen and having babies and out of the workforce, and kids were to be seen and not heard. And you sat at the table and you didn't talk, you ate your dinner. That was kind of that 50s weird stuff. And my family at dinner time was just like an explosion of conversation, and my dad talking and all of us kids talking and stuff. So whenever I went to a friend's house, was asked to stay for dinner, I was horrified at how everybody just sat. And the only words spoken during dinner was, please pass the gravy. Could you please pass the butter? And I just didn't understand it. So I quit going to my friend's house for dinner because it wasn't any fun. It was much better, even though my brothers were jerks. It was much better at home, where at least dinner was fun. And my mom's cooking was pretty incredible. And she always had a fresh made cake or pie or cookies or bars or a jelly roll every night. I never wanted to miss that. So by the time the early 60s hit, everything was kind of beaten out of me. And out of self-preservation, I just walked away from a lot of stuff. But a lot of stuff, you know, when your mind is filled with samskaras and worldly impact, you lose a lot of that innocence, obviously, and what can come about only in an innocent, or usually in an innocent life. So that was all gone. And then in 1958, my mother's sister, who she was very close with, died. And she'd been having horrific headaches, and they didn't have CAT scans or PET scans or MRIs or anything in those days, in 58. And so they just kept treating her for headaches. And one night I had this dream that this monster popped out of my aunt's head. So the next morning I was crying and I was saying, oh, Aunt Clara, this monster came out of her head. So my mom calls the doctor and says, I think you need to look for a tumor. And by God, that's what they discovered, was a tumor in her head when they finally did an x-ray and saw that she had a tumor. But unfortunately, she got so sick that at my parents' little rental house, which was just a couple blocks away from the grammar school I went to, after school was over, I'd run down to my aunt's house and I'd stay with her, and my mom would pick me up before dinner because I'd wash the dishes. I gave her medicine. wash her face. I'd do those kind of things because I loved her. She was like a second mother to me. So this felt like I was really a big kid, and I didn't turn 8 until September, and this is on August 18th. When I went to the house, my aunt was sleeping, so I thought, oh, I don't want to wake her up. So I went in the living room and turned on the TV, and I think I was watching Felix the cat. And I spaced out about giving her medicine. Now, I know medically, missing her pain medicine had nothing to do with her death. I know that now. But as an 8-year-old, when I realized, oh my God, I didn't give her medicine, when I went into the bedroom, she was already gone. So I thought I had killed my aunt. And I was beside myself, not only for what I thought I had done, but the grief my mother had over the loss of her sister, who was 10 or 11 years older than she. So right after that happened, I didn't want my mom to know that I was crying, about my aunt, and that I felt so guilty and believed that I had killed her. So I would just weep in my bed, and I put my pillow over my face. And during the summertime, it was pretty hot, and we'd always go swimming before we'd go to bed. And I had long hair, and my mom would always put it in braids so it wouldn't get tangled up in the water. So I'd go to bed with a wet head so we'd be cool, because there was no air conditioning. And I'd cry myself to sleep, and then I'd wake up, and there was Jesus sitting on my bed in a white sadra, shoulder-length curly hair, a beautiful mustache, the most gorgeous eyes. And he would open my braids, my plaits, and pull my hair up, pull them apart so that the air would dry him, and then he'd replait it. And he'd just stroke my shoulder and pull my covers up, and he'd just sit with me. And this went on for a couple of years. And during that time, a couple of times I talked to him, I said, well, where's my aunt? And he'd say, because my grandfather had died just not to like right around the same time. And so Jesus explained to me, which I later read Baba's words, that when you die, you gain a new body, much like when your coat gets old for you, you change your old coat because it's worn and got holes and doesn't serve a purpose anymore. So he used that explanation, example, is that the right word? That was an example he gave to kind of ease the pain. And he said, you'll see her again. And a couple of times, he took me up to what I thought was heaven. And there was this beautiful figure sitting in a gorgeous throne. And my grandfather and my aunt was on each side of him. And he said, see, they're still here. You just have to learn to love them differently. So that was one thing that happened. And that went on for quite a long time. And how active a child's mind is in magical thinking. There was this big orange globe, and louvered windows were all the thing in the late 50s, early 60s. Those are those window panes that are about that wide and that long. And you'd open them with a lever, and then they'd open and then shut this way. And when they were closed, this orange globe would come up to where the seam was, where the two panes were closing in on each other. And it would flatten out from like the size of an orange and come in through that pane. And then out of this, it would get real big in my room, and out of the door would step my aunt, and she'd come get me, and she'd say, let's go for a ride tonight. And she'd take me around to the stars and up into the heavens and hold my hand and do all kinds of stuff. So that's how magical my mind was at the time, and how I don't know if it's that. Words are failing me tonight. I apologize. That's how I kind of resolved that. But that was the tenderness that happened in my mind with the figure of Jesus and my aunt, who I just love so much. Then when I hit junior high school, I found I hadn't been exposed to Mexican culture. I hadn't been exposed to Japanese people. I had never heard anything about Buddhism. I didn't know anything about Black people because I lived in Glendale, and this was the organizational office of not the Ku Klux Klan or the John Birch Society. One of those two, they're kind of the same, but it was so, and there was rules on the charter of the city of Glendale that no, she wants to go out, Persia, and I have to let her out. Just give me 1 minute, please. I'm so sorry. You want to go outside, honey? Let's go outside. I'm sorry.
Poor Persia Rose, she's got a pretty sore leg.
All right, I'm back. So when I started junior high school, I was attracted to these different kids at the school because they were different. They were interesting. And I'd look at the lunches that they'd bring, and they were different than I was used to. And so I befriended these people, which irritated the white students who called me an N lover and a Jap lover. Don't you know we fought those people in the war? And yet Marilyn Murata, my Japanese friend who was Buddhist, her family had been here for more generations than mine and had been interred during the war. So I found these kids kind of fascinating, and I think it opened me up to accept different cultures. So when I went to India, nothing was a surprise or a shock. It was like, oh, okay, this is it. This is what I have to do to kind of get along and be accepted and not offend anybody. Although I'm sure I offended people left and right. So it was my friend Marilyn who kind of introduced me to the concept of karma, reincarnation, and the acceptance and love was easy to give to somebody that you cared about and was easy to be around. But she always said it's always more difficult to be loving to your enemies, but you have to also remember never to wish ill will to them, because karmically that affects you as well when you have those kind of thoughts. So here's this 13-year-old girl giving me a life lesson. Then the 60s came and I got involved with civil rights, Vietnam, government corruption and stuff. I graduated in 68 from high school and nursing school in 69. And when I graduated, I was chosen from my class to go to St. Joseph's Medical Center, the hospital out in Burbank, because they were just going to start open heart surgery. So they were going to train me to understand inhalation therapy, ICU nursing, and open heart surgery technician, to give them the not the weapons, what is it called? Instruments, the instruments, and then do the follow-up care in the ICU. And my dad at that time, no, you go. My dad at that time was working, just wrapping up the film Myra Breckenridge, of which John Huston and Raquel Welch was the star of it or whatever. I never saw the movie. But he's working with Raquel. I'm at St. Joseph's Hospital, and they only did 2 surgeries a week and then 4 surgeries a week. So there were days in the ICU when I didn't have intensive care for open heart surgery patients. So one of the patients I took care of was Raquel's father-in-law, her husband's father. And he had a massive neck resection. So I'm doing a treatment on him, and all of a sudden the door into the ICU room where Mr. Smith was opens, and here comes Raquel. Now, mind you, my father was in the movie industry, so I wasn't interested in it. It's like people who have fathers who are painters, they don't I mean, what do they care about painting houses? So it was nothing new, but I hadn't seen any movies and had been a student and working and stuff. So I didn't know who Raquel was from the lady down the street. So I looked up, and here's my patient all exposed with all this stuff showing. And I said to her, I said, excuse me, but how rude of you to walk in, first of all, without knocking. And second of all, there's a sign on the door that says, do not enter, treatment in progress. I said, I don't know who you think you are, but you need to turn around and leave. So she turns around and leaves. And at the nursing desk in the ICU, it's a bank of windows so that you can look, the nurses can see into all the rooms, you know, where the patients are. So they're watching Raquel go into the room where I'm doing the treatment, and I'm giving her not the finger, but my index, like, how can you do this? And she turns around and walks out. So the charge nurse comes in and says, who do you think you are? What did you say to her? That's Raquel Welch. And I said, I don't care who it is. It could be God. I'd still tell God, get out of here. There's a sign there. You know, there's a sign put up for a reason. The patient's confidentiality and the treatment is, you know, who wants to be exposed like that to people coming in? Well, you don't know who she is, da, 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 da. So I later find out that she goes back to the waiting room, which was just across the hall from the door to the ICU. And her two kids, Tawny and Damon, her sister, and a couple of other people were in the waiting room. And she says, oh my God, she said, I don't know when the last time this happened, but I was treated like a regular person. This woman actually kicked me out of the treatment room and gave me a scolding. And so she was kind of shocked at that. Okay, I'm gonna close the back door so the cold air doesn't come in. I'll Persia just came back. Watch out, watch out. Come here, come here, come here. Come, come. Come, 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 come. All right, I'm back. So now she's getting ready to make another movie called The Beloved, and it was going to be shot in Spain. So as Myra Breckenridge is finishing up, she's telling my dad, she said, you know, my assistant quit. I don't have anybody to help with the kids, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to be gone for probably 8-9 months, maybe longer. I need an assistant. And she said, but I've been interviewing these people and they're just like, oh, Raquel. And she says, I don't want that around me. So my dad said, well, you should call and talk to my daughter. She grew up with me. She came on, she was my assistant for many films I made. So she knows intimately about what it's like to make a film. And trust me, she's not going to even probably know you, and she's not going to be in awe of you. And so Raquel says to him, well, what's your daughter's name? He says, Vesta Clinton. So I don't know, a few days later or whatever, she comes back in and she can now come into the room. And I was in there and she sees my tag, my name tag on my uniform. And she says, Vesta Clinton, that's an unusual name. Is your father in the movie industry? I said, yes. Now, mind you, my relationship with my folks was strained then because they were pissed off at me because I was rejecting their value system. I was a rabble rouser into civil rights and blah, blah, blah. So we were strained at the time. So I said, you know, I thought, oh my God, does this woman know my dad? Ooh, is she going to say, oh, your daughter did it? So I said, yes, he is, but was kind of curt with her. And he said, well, he thought it would be good for me to talk with you. And I said, how do you know my dad? And she says, well, I'm Raquel Welch. I said, so. And then she says, I'm finishing up a movie with him. And he thought you might like to come stay with me and be my assistant and work on the education for my kids when we're in London and then living in Spain. And you could help kind of when I'm staying there. And I said, oh, thank you very much, but I can't do that. And she said, why? What are you talking about? And I said, well, I had to sign a contract with St. Joseph's. They paid over $100,000 to train me in inhalation therapy, open heart surgery technology, ICU nursing, blah, 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 because this is all new stuff that's happening. And so they spent all this money and time training me, and I had to sign a 2-year contract with them. So I said, and I just started on my contract a few months back, so there's no way I can go be with you. So a few days later, and I'll never forget the director of nurses' name. Her name was Mrs. Averman. So I'm in the ICU. I'm sitting at the desk. I'm charting, because we charted by hand. There was no computers. So all of a sudden I'm charting, and then I feel this tap on my shoulder. And Mrs. Averman must have been 5 feet tall if she was an inch. So she says, "You're fired." I was horrified. Oh my God, what did I do? Can I make it better? How can I apologize? Who do I, I had no idea what I had done. And I said, well, why am I being fired? And she said, you're being fired for being stupid. I was horrified. No one had ever called me stupid before. So I said, stupid? She said, yeah. She said, Raquel Welch came up to my office. She just left about an hour ago. And she told me that she offered to pay you more than what we're paying you here to do the work you're doing. And you go get to live in Europe in 5-star hotels and mansions and on the coast of the Sol to Spain. And you told her no. And I said, well, yeah, how can I go? I've signed a contract. I've got almost 2 years left on it. And she said, well, you have a choice. Either I'm going to fire you and let you go, or you can write a resignation letter. And is it post date or predate? Make it back for when you make something a previous date, is that predated or whatever? So let's just say if it was June 1st, she said, so put May 1st on it. So you've got a whole month that you've given a notice, and just say something about it's a family emergency and you have to leave the state. And she said, in a way, it is a family emergency and you are going to be leaving the state. So you're not lying there, but that will be in your record. Because I said to her, I said, but when I'm done working with her and I need a recommendation, for my nursing career, I don't want somebody pulling a file if you're not the director of nurses and saying, oh, she walked away after we spent over $100,000 on her and didn't give us 2-week notice and blah, blah, blah. She said that'll never happen because I'm going to write a recommendation letter to be used if Vesta ever needs a recommendation from St. Joseph's Hospital. So the reason I'm telling you this story is that it's Raquel's brother, Jimmy, and his wife, Leslie Tejada, who are the ones who told me about Meher Baba. So if I hadn't been pushed and given no option really to go be with Raquel and work with her and live with her, I never would have heard Bob. Well, I shouldn't say never, but I wouldn't have heard about Bob at the time I did. So where I ended up living with her before we went was on San Ysidro Road, just off of Benedict Canyon, about halfway up the canyon before you hit Mulholland Drive. So that's where I lived. And it's like, here's San Ysidro and here's Benedict Canyon. So you go down San Ysidro and then you come to a corner, and the corner's like this. If you turn right on the street here, it's Pickfair. It's where the Pickfair estate was, 500 feet away. And where I lived with Raquel was right here. And it was in Raquel's driveway in Jimmy's VW bus, because he used to volunteer at orphanages down in Mexico. And he was up in the States for a while. And he had this picture of Baba. It's the one everybody says the pizza man delivers. He was older. And I didn't recognize the face, but I said, well, who's that? Because, it was 69 at the time. And there was a lot, with The Who and Bob O'Reilly and Masters and the Beatles and all this kind of stuff. And Maharishi Yogi. And so I was interested. I thought, oh, interesting. He's following, one of the gurus or something. So I said, who is it? He said, well, that's Meher Baba. Boom. It was like, geez, Louise, I was hit by lightning. I knew the name, but the face, I didn't recognize the face. It wasn't until, I want to make sure I'm not missing something. So it wasn't until I left employment with Raquel that I got to be very friendly with Jimmy and Leslie. They were just the sweetest people and so kind. And Leslie was so fascinating in her thought process and everything. And Jimmy was just like, Meher Baba's God, this and that. So when I was leaving, I thought, I want to go live in Santa Barbara because we always used to visit as a family in Santa Barbara and I liked it. It was a small community. So I called them up and I said, hey, can I stay with you till I find a place? And they said, sure. So I went up and they live above Montecito. Santa Barbara, here's the ocean and then here's Highway 101. And then you come into Montecito and Santa Barbara. Well, there's all these mountains above Santa Barbara and Montecito. And up San Ysidro Road, you turn right on Mountain, and they lived up on East Mountain Drive, looking out over the ocean. So I go up to their house, and they lived in a sweet little cottage behind this estate in Montecito. So as I knock on the door, Leslie comes to the door and she opens the door and I say, hi, how are you? Da, 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 da. And she says, well, did you eat? It's lunchtime. Do you want to have lunch with us? Blah, 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 I'll make you a sandwich. And as I look over her right shoulder on the wall across the living room, there's the picture of the poster, I am the ancient one. I was Rama, I was Krishna, I was Buddha, I was Jesus, I was this one, I was that one, and now I'm Meher Baba. I thought I was going to pass out. It was the exact same Baba, or exact same face, hair, mustache, everything, white robe, that Jesus, I thought was Jesus, was on my bed. And all I could think of was, I was saying, the first thing out of my mouth was, how do you have a picture of Jesus when there were no cameras 2,000 years ago? She says, oh, that was taken in the 20s. No, in the 20s, and that's Meher Baba. Well, I knew that was God. I knew that was God. No, I knew that was God. And all of a sudden, I said, well, where is he? Well, he left his body. No, please don't do that. Go lay down. Go see Persia. Go see Persia. Go. So I knew, I said, well, where is he? Well, he's no longer. He dropped his body a couple of years ago. But his disciples are still in India. All I could think of, and it was just like such a pinch, was that I had to go because I was close. Sojourner, please don't do this. I'm so sorry.
Oh, Vesta, we're all excited.
Okay.
Picking up on the excitement of this.
Okay. So all of a sudden I had this obsession that I had to go with this. It was this Sojourner, go on. Go lay down. It was as close as I would get to meeting God. At least I could meet the people who were with him. So, see, she's like me. I didn't mind when I was a kid either. So a few months later, on December 19th, 1973 or 74, I left for Calcutta. The reason I flew to Calcutta is because Sojourner, go.
Sojourner, giving them a little bit more food.
Yeah, but I don't want it to upset their stomach because the treats are rich. Go. So I flew to Calcutta because Maryann and her sister Susie, Laura were taking Montessori. All right, go. That's a no. Go lay down. She does this when I'm on the phone too. So I wanted to go be with them because then we were going to take the train across India to Amartithi. But I realized when I landed in Calcutta, I just knew they were teaching Montessori. They didn't know I was coming. And it was on the fly that I got my ticket and I just went to Calcutta. So I landed at the airport and I'm going, okay, what did you do now? You're 23, you have no idea what you're doing. You've never been in a third world country like this by yourself. And I had these 2 huge suitcases.
Vesta, tell them how you knew Maryann and Laura. And
oh, they were part of the Santa Barbara group with Sam and his wife at the time, Margaret Oben. She's Oben now, Oben. And let's see, Randy Buck, Maureen Hazard and her family. And that there was that group in Santa Barbara, and Maryann and Susie were part of that group. And I just love Maryann and Susie. So I thought I'll go with them because we were writing letters back and forth and they said they were going to take the train for Amartithi. Now, mind you, I had been severely assaulted before I went to India. And it was so horrendous that I didn't want to live anymore. I was in so much trauma and pain that I thought, okay, I've just found God. They're going to celebrate, it would have been the 4th or 5th anniversary since he left the planet. So I'm going to go take darshan, meet those people that served him. And when Amartithi's over, I'll go back to Calcutta and then I'll go up to the Himalayas and I'll find an abyss above Rishikesh and I'll toss myself over. I just had romanticized suicide to such an effect that by God, I knew that Baba knew my suffering and the torment that I was in, and he would understand and he would relieve me, that he would forgive me for doing such a horrible thing because he would see that I really had no choice. So when I land, I'm at the airport in Calcutta, I'm nervous because it was mostly men and you couldn't get into a taxi. There were no female taxi drivers. So I started getting leery about getting into a taxi by myself in Calcutta, trying to find where Maryann and Susie were. I was going to try and find a Montessori school. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I started going down the line of taxi drivers and they're all rushing. They're all pulling at my suitcases. Get in my taxi. I'll take you. I'll take you. And I have to push. No, leave me alone. And finally, I saw sitting at the driver's seat in this old beat up taxi. It was the worst taxi in the line. And it was a Sardarji. And he had to be maybe in his 60s. And I looked at him and he turned and he looked at me and his eyes were so sweet. And I felt, oh, this is the person who I can trust, because you can't have eyes like that and be a cruel or nasty person. So I knew in my gut that this was okay. So I said, can you help me? He said, yes. So he got out of his cab, put my suitcases in the trunk. And I said, no, because I was nervous. And I said, can you put the suitcases in the back seat with me? And he said, yes, I'll put one in front and one in the back. So I sat on the passenger side of the back seat with a suitcase in the front and another suitcase behind this Sardarji. And he said, where to? And I said, I don't know. He said, what do you mean you don't know? And I said, well, I've never been to Calcutta. And I said, I'm looking for my 2 friends, they're sisters. He said, are they Indian or are they American? And I said, they're two American sisters, but they're teaching Indian women the Montessori method of schooling so that they can open schools and offer an alternative education for Indian children, but especially for girls who aren't encouraged to go to school. And if they go to school as young children, not to continue with their studies. So he said, oh my, he said, I think you're talking about Maryann and Laura. I couldn't believe it. I said, how do you know Maryann and Laura? Ah, my wife, she's a student of these two girls. And I said, well, do you know where they live? Yes, I picked them up many times in Kanatsu and bring them to their home. And he said, and then he leans forward, he says, you know, they're living with Brahmins. So you're going to have to be very, very good. Always wash your hands when you're around Brahmins. And I thought that was kind of a funny thing to say. So he takes me and we're driving, I don't know for how long, but he pulls up in front of this wall that had to be 8 feet tall. And it was a cement wall because they would build things with stone and then fill it in with cement. But what freaked me out was on the top was all broken glass all along it. So no one could scale the wall and walk in and steal from their house or anything. But across from the gate into this wall was a huge field, soccer, and there were oxen carts going and this and that. And so when I pushed on the door opened. And I thought, how bizarre. They have an 8-foot wall, all this glass along the top so no one can scoot over it and go in and rob the place. And yet the front gate is open. So somebody must have left it open. No. Somebody must have left it open. So I walk up to the cottage door and I knock on the door. Now, Maryann and Laura have been in India maybe 8 to 10 months, maybe a year at this point. And they're not expecting me. I didn't know that while they were there, their nutrition wasn't as good as they were used to. And they weren't taking vitamins, or they were and it wasn't working. So they were a little drained and not as healthy as when I last saw them. So here's Maryann. There was a little, you know, the window that you look out to see who's at your door. It was maybe 5-inch by 5-inch square. So I'm knocking on the door and all of a sudden this little window opens and there's Maryann's face. She's looking. And she turns her head and slams the window and she says, we're more sick than we realize. I think I just saw Vesta standing on the other side of the door. And Susie says, I call Laura Susie, because her name Laura's Sue, and I don't know, I just always called her Susie. So Susie says, well, let me look. And Susie opens it and she slams it and she says, I think we should open the door. I think that really is Vesta. So she opens the door and that's how I went in. And by now I had to pee. So my first introduction to an Indian toilet was when they said, here's where you go pee. I didn't know what to, I mean, how the hell do you do that? I can't stand over it. I didn't have anything to make a stream. And they could tell I was confused. So Maryann comes and she says, no, what you do is you turn around and face the door and then you squat and then you pee and do everything. And then you use, and I said, well, where's the toilet paper? She said, oh, we don't use toilet paper. We clean with water. So she explained to me how to do that. So that was my introduction there. So, I mean, look at how not only was I directed to their house, but how I made it out of the airport. I mean, and how the Sardarji taxiwala knows Susie and Maryann and where they lived. I mean, it's amazing. And his wife is one of their students. And I don't know, there was 11 million people living there at that time, in a city that was built for 2 to 3 million people. But the Bangladesh had happened, And so there were millions of people that fled the persecution and the pogroms in Bangladesh and were living on the streets in Calcutta. So one of the things that I did while they were at school is I'd walk the streets and I'd see these women in white cotton saris with their heads off. And I could see that they were checking people that were laying in the street and then tying up their feet. And then this man would come with a big hook and then pull these bodies out. And then somebody would come on a cart and they'd lift these dead bodies and throw them in the cart and take them to the edge of town and burn the bodies in a mass grave. And what had happened was they starved to death or they were diseased and ill. So they just either died in their sleep or from starvation. And so I found out they were Mother Theresa and her, what were her Sisters of Charity? I can't remember the name right now. I'm not going to take time to try and figure it out. But so I asked if I could help. And so I started working with them out in the streets. And when it would rain, or when there was water in the streets, because sometimes they would water down the streets with these big water things, so they blow out the water to keep the dust down, and then they'd come and sweep the streets clean. But there would be enough water on the sidewalk up against these walls where the dead bodies would slightly move like floating because the water made them buoyant. And so I would identify, but I was told never to touch them because I think they just didn't want a Westerner touching them and getting sick or something. I don't know. I never asked why, but I would identify point bodies that were slightly bobbing in the water. And then they'd come tie the feet, pull them out with a hook, throw them in the cart. But twice I saw these women. One woman I saw standing and she was leaning up against the wall. And a couple of days later, I saw another woman sitting down. She was so weak she couldn't stand. But both women had infants that couldn't have been more than a few days old that had died in their arms. And one of them died while suckling the breast of its mother. I don't even know if it was a boy or a girl. And I looked at her and she was so emaciated. She looked like a skeleton. And how she gave birth and was able to even keep this baby alive, I have no idea. But I so gently, and the baby was, you know, because it's 100 degrees or whatever temperature it was. So there was an odor of decaying flesh. And I so gently tried to remove these babies from these women and held it. And then one of the sisters came and wrapped the baby, but another sister came and took the woman to wherever Mother Theresa had her convent or wherever she stayed. And I don't know what happened to these women, but 2 times I had to take a dead baby off of, you know, out of its mother's arms, which was pretty horrific. So we take the, it's third week or so of January, and we take the train to go to Ahmednagar for Amar Tithi. And we get to Amar Tithi and we stayed at Akhbar Press after checking in at the trust office. And I think it was a couple of days later, it was Amar Tithi. And so you didn't go out to Meherazad. And there wasn't that many people. There was just like a few thousand people that would come for Amar Tithi at that time. So we waited, and then Amar Tithi happens. And during Amar Tithi, I saw a couple of people faint, and a couple of people had hurt themselves and needed, you know, wound cleansing and that kind of stuff. So I would take them to the first aid station or get them okay from after passing out, and then I'd be done with it and I'd go back with Maryann and Susie or whatever. But word went out to Goher that there was this Western woman who was helping people who fainted or doing minor wound care, that type of thing. So they didn't know who it was, so they asked the can you bring her so we can see who it is? So when they brought me, that's when Goher took my hands in her hand. And as you know, Goher had hands that were like silk pouches lined with the most luxurious velvet. And when I put my hand in hers, it's like you melted into that hand. I mean, it was just like, it was so remarkable. I know of no one who has hands like that. And I doubt anyone for another 700 years is ever going to have hands like that. But I remember thinking that was Baba's doctor. He must have picked her because her hands are gentle. And I thought, oh, her hands are so gentle, she must be a gentle person. And so she said, oh, so you're helping? She said, well, let me take you to the other first aid station and work with me, because sometimes there's a line because they see me and they want me to, oh, my headache or this or that. And they just want to go here to treat them, which I thought was so sweet. So they could see Goher and I would give them, a couple aspirin or whatever, and then she'd take care of, wound care or whatever else was going on. So that was my first introduction to Goher. And then later, Mehera had heard that some Western lady was helping Goher and she wanted to meet me. So that was my first meeting with Mehera, and she gave me a hug. And and out of the blue, she just said, you continue helping Goher. It's a big help for her because so many people like to see her, have her see them, yada, yada, yada. So Amartithi was only like four days or something like that, 3 days. So when Amartithi was over, I wasn't spending that much time with the women, but Mehera called me again, and I had met Mani and Katie was there, Arnavaz, Meherazad, Rano. So Mehera says, come back during summer and then let Goher show you the dispensary and work with Goher in the dispensary, because you'd be able to help her in the dispensary because she works so hard now and we're all getting old and this and that. So as soon as she said that, my desire to throw myself in the abyss from the Himalayas completely left. It was like, oh, wow, I was given purpose. I was given direction. And it was so simple. You can still be useful. You have something to offer. So that's how I started. I went up back to Calcutta, and it was the first part of summertime, and we all went up to Rishikesh, and we came across this monk who was staying in one of the ashrams. And what Susie and Maryann and I were doing, we were down in the Ganges and we were baptizing each other and saying the prayers, and we were doing a full submersion baptism. And he's watching this from the banks of the river, and he comes down the steps and he said, oh, he said, are you American or did you come from, I don't know if he said Europe or England or whatever. We said, well, we're Americans. Well, how come you're here? Well, we follow the teachings of Meher Baba, and one of the places he came on the Kumbh
Mela.
Yeah. So we wanted to see where Meher Baba went. He says, oh, I know of your Meher Baba. We were shocked. Oh, you know of Meher Baba? We were so excited. And he said, yes, have you read God Speaks? No. What? You follow the teachings of Meher Baba and you've not read God Speaks? I've read it, and he used the word thrice. I've read it thrice. Shame on you for claiming to be his follower, but not reading his words. So that was just kind of an interesting thing, that even there we run into somebody who knows Meher Baba, and this is like 1974. So am I doing okay? Are we okay? Okay. When I came back to Nagar, it was summertime, so there were no pilgrims or anything. And usually what happens is, especially people, since Meherazad and Meherabad was closed, people would go back to the States, but Heather and Lindsay were living there because Erica was living in Madras working for James Cox. And Heather was helping Monty at the trust, and Lindsay was working, helping with the dispensary out at Meherazad. So there was another bed there at Pop's house. Excuse me. And so I ended up staying with Heather and Lindsay. Now, Pop's house was the old ice bungalow in the cantonment area of the military of Ahmednagar. And it was used for special envoys that were coming, or inspection of the troops by some big general in the Indian Army or the British Army or whatever. And that was Pop's house. And it was just a huge room that had to be 40, 45 feet long and at least 25, 30 feet wide. And it was 20 feet, at least 20 feet tall. And the ceiling was bamboo, long bamboo that had canvas, nailed onto it. That was the roof. And when you walked in, you could see in between the squares, in between where the bamboo was sagging. And what it was rat nests, the weight of the rat nests and the rats. So you could hear them, but you didn't see them. And one thing that when Mehera realized who I was, a funny thing happened during Amrtithi. I saw the village men coming up from Erangel. They were coming up, walking over to the path up to the hill, and they had these pieces of wood with all these cymbals and chimes on it. And they were singing these songs and doing this dance and turning around and lifting their legs and bang, bang. But it was all in synchronicity or synchronized. Is that the right word? Synchronized? Yeah, synchronized. I was taken by this. And so I went and tried to dance, joined the dancing and was watching their moves and mirrored their moves, because I had taken modern dance before. And so we used to always mirror each other's images. So I was used to copying my partner's movement. So it was very easy for me to pick up, flip around, flip around. And one of the men handed over one of these sticks with the cymbals. So I'm in a sari. And I start dancing with these men and coming up the hill. And when they come to where the samadhi is, and you know where the little stage is right across from the samadhi, that's where the women were. So Mehera sees me and she goes, "Oh my God, there's a woman dancing with those men." And I think it was Mani or Goher said, "Ooh, that's the woman that was helping me. That's the woman you were asking about." And Arnavaz and Goher tell me later that she said, "Oh, she's quite bold." Little did she know. But anyway, so after the dance was over, somebody came and got me and said, "Mehera wants to see you." So that's what afterward Mehera had said about coming to stay. So I thought that was kind of a cute thing. And I find out, oh, she's quite bold. So Pop's house, as I was describing it, when you leave the trust office and you go left to go on the road out to Meherazad, and then there's that big curve before you hit the Meherazad highway that goes out to Aurangabad as well. Well, there's that saint, that Muslim saint, that's on the roadside on the left-hand side as you're going out to Meherazad. And there's a road that goes down just before you come to that samadhi of that Muslim saint. And that's the road that led to Pop's house. And there was a big gate, and we'd cycle through that gate and go to the house. And the ice house is where Goher's family stayed when they left Quetta, when Baba told them to leave when the earthquake happened. And it's also not only where her family stayed, but when Meherazad was being prepared for Baba to live after the new life, he stayed with the women at Pop's house. And then when they left to go out of Meherazad, Goher's father, whose name was Rusi, they called him Rusi, although his name was Rustom. Rusi Pop lived, that's how we got Pop's house. Rusi Pop stayed there, and Jacko was there a couple of years before I came. And he was working in the trust with money. And so he was staying with Goher's father before he moved to the trust by Audie's office. And they moved Heather and Lindsay there. So that was where I stayed. And a funny thing happened, because not too long afterward, I'd stay at Meherazad for a little while and then come back into town, stay for a month, come back for 2 months. That first year, coming and going. So I wasn't living there, but when a need arose, I would stay there. So at this time, Erico was asked to be the night watchman up at the Samadhi. And Heather was working with Mani in the trust. And so they were asked to move to Meherazad in a room in Mandali, where Mandali Hall was. And Erico was to help with Muhammad Must. And Heather would go into town, cycle into town, work in the trust, and then come back when her trust work was done. And so they lived like, here's Mandali Hall. Here's the entrance to the hall. And to the left of the entrance was Padre's room. And to the right of the entrance was a couple of rooms, plus the bathing rooms at the end of the building. And Heather and Erico were given a room just on the side of Mandali Hall. So Pat Sumner was working in the office. And so she was moved to Pop's house, and I was living with Pat Sumner for a while. Poor Pat. Anyway, but we developed an interesting environment at Pop's house. And once, and I think the second summer I was there, she went to England or to the UK for the 3 months of summer, and she comes back to Nugger with a winemaking kit that she got in London. And there's a tree in India called the umla tree, and it's got these little berries on it that are about the size of a little smaller than cherries. I'm sure Goher and everybody knows what I'm talking about. Dinku. Is Sanober here? But anyway, they know what I'm talking about. And it's a tart little berry. And I believe they extract oil from it for hair. I'm not positive. That's kind of my recollection right now. We had decided, since these berries were so abundant, we were going to use them to make wine. Now, by this time, because in all the corners, there were these like 18, 20-foot poles that were about that wide around at the bottom, and then they were tapered at the top. They were always put in the corners so that you had access to what we called the snake pole, because the snake pole was used in case you ever found, what are those snakes that go up like this? And what are they called? Rosalie?
Cobra.
Cobra. So cobras were abundant. I mean, we didn't open our pindra. You didn't just stand in front of the pindra and open it like this, because you'd get a snake bite if the snake had gotten in there unbeknownst to you. So you always stood on the side of the pindra and opened the door closest to you, so there was protection. It couldn't hit you through the door. So Mehera had always told me, that's how you open the door. So if somehow the cobra's in there, you won't get struck.
Oh,
What's a pindra, Vesta?
What?
What's a pindra?
Oh, pindra is like a little cupboard, and it's usually got mesh, and you close it so you want to keep the rats out of your food, and you keep your bananas there. So, you know, it's sometimes your dishes so they don't get gecko poop on them and that kind of stuff. It's just a clean area. Also, our bathing room. So here's Pop's house, and the door was over here. And then this long area here was the kitchen, and it was probably maybe 6 or 7 feet wide by 25 feet long. And at the end of it was a door into the bathing area where there were commodes. There were 3 commodes, one for each of us and one for a guest. When you bathed, there was a bathing area that had blocks built up about a foot, so the water would get all over the floor. And it was a 5 by 5 foot square. And there was a bathing stool that you'd sit on. And there were no pipes or that kind of stuff. There was a hole in the wall at the foundation that was about this big. And we kept this huge metal plug in it that had to weigh at least 10 pounds. It was just a big ball of metal with like a cone at the end of it. I don't know where it came from. It must have come from some engine or something. But you kept that in the hole because you didn't want the cobra entering the hole where the bath water would go out. But you never would touch that piece of metal with your hands. You had to use a stick. And let me tell you, using a stick to get that metal piece out, you know, it just wasn't that easy. But once you saw there was no snake in it, then you could take your bath and the water would flow out. And before we'd go take our bath, I'd go out into the yard because there was a huge yard out where Pop's house was. And there were all these little huts that squatters had come in, and they had chickens. And I remember ducks. I don't know why I remember ducks. But what would happen is I'd go out on the veranda where the front door was, and I'd go woo, 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 because that's how I would call the chickens and the ducks. So the chickens would come and they'd splash in the water because water was so scarce and you didn't want to just waste your bath water. I mean, they saved it in Meherazad and used it in the garden, you know, float into a thing and then they'd dig it out with these big cans to save the water and then they'd use it in the garden. So the chickens would come. So you out of this hole, you could see the chickens, you know, because I guess the worms were in the soil and when it got wet, the worms came up to the top because you could see them pulling the worms out of that. I mean, it was a trip. And one time Goher came into town and she had to potty. So she went into the potty. It was the first time she'd been into to use the commode. And she looks up and we had put Baba's picture in there. So when we're bathing, we could stare adoringly at Baba, right? So she walks in and she goes, "Oh my God." I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "Get that picture out of here." I said, "What are you talking about? That I love to sit and look at it. Oh, Baba, I love you so much. I'm baptizing myself in your," I mean, I was just crazy. So Gloria says, "No," she says, "I don't want to go piddle. And how can you even go poop in there when Baba's watching you?" And that was my first impression that they literally saw Baba alive in those photographs that they had. And he was watching them through those photographs. What an incredible concept. And then it made sense to me because all through Meherazad, they lived with him. You know, like in your family home, you have pictures when you're 5 and maybe one graduation or, you know, a wedding picture. But you don't plaster your walls with your mom and dad and the brothers and your sisters and all that kind of stuff. But everywhere you looked, there was no place in Meherazad you could look where you didn't see Baba's face, because that kept him alive. And they really believed that he could see you. I mean, she was horrified that we were asking her to use the potty with Baba's picture above her. She says, "I have to lift my skirt. He'll see my dome." And dome is the Gujarati word that they would use for bottom. You know, it was like, I'll give you a smack on your dome. They didn't say a smack on your butt. It was always they used the word dome. So I have to pull my skirt up, my dress up. And he sees my dome and then he watches me pee-pee? No, you get this picture out of here. So that's how the picture got removed out of the washroom. Am I going on too much? Are we okay? Okay.
I would say we have maybe 10 minutes. It's getting on midnight for folks back here.
Okay, I'm almost done.
Good, okay.
And we can stop anytime. I don't care. Obviously, I fell in love with Goher and Arnavaz, and Meherazad was my refuge. It was like my lifeline. And at the time when I wasn't staying there, I didn't mind it so bad because the only days I couldn't go to Meherazad was on Friday because Meherazad was closed on Fridays because that's when they'd all take a deep breath, they'd do their work, yada, yada, yada. But Goher used Fridays to come into town to do trust work or to go grocery shopping, pick up things in the bazaar for the clinic or whatever. And it was a crucifixion to me to have her in town. I couldn't see her. So crazy. I was so crazy. I'd get on my bike and I'd just drive through the bazaar hoping I'd see the trust car. But after a while, since I wasn't finding her, I just stayed in my bed on Fridays and I wouldn't get out of bed. And I was so depressed. Sometimes I'd cry. Oh, why, Baba? Why do you make me stay away? She can come into town. Nobody has to see me at Meherazad. I can just stay in the clinic room, which was on the men's side at the very end by the kitchen. It's where Falu's room was. That was the dispensary that Goher started after Baba dropped his body. So I would just lay in bed and cry, or just, whoa, woe is me. I was just distraught. I mean, I'm just 24 years old and I'm goofy. So one day, all of a sudden, I hear a car pull up, and by now I know the women's feet, the shuffle of their feet. And I'm thinking, oh, that sounds like Goher's chuckles on the veranda stone. And then I hear, woohoo, Jai Baba, Jai Baba. And I tore out of bed, and it's Goher. And she says, I have to piddle. And I want to know if you want to come into the bazaar with me today. Oh my God. Oh, I just went nuts. Yes, yes. She says, well, get dressed. You're not going into the bazaar looking like that. So she goes and piddles. I throw on a clean salwar kameez because that's what I wore. Covered my head, walk out with her. And that was the first time I went into the bazaar for the trust. With Goher. And so by God's grace and the compassion of Goher, and I'm sure she told them, oh, Vesta's suffering. She can't come out here. They used to call me the mad woman. Eruch, when I'd show up in the morning, like at 6:30, when they were just having their tea, they hadn't even done arti. He'd say, oh my God, Baba, what did we do? This mad woman has come. We haven't had a sip of tea. We haven't had arti. What is she doing here? And I was always terrified because Oliver was the gatekeeper, that he was just going to send me away. It's not open yet. You're early. If people know you're coming early, everybody's going to want to come, yada, yada, yada. You're not special. Oh, I know I'm not special, but let me go inside. Nobody will know I'm here. Just you and me. It's our secret, Oliver. I'll go in and I'll strip all the used matchsticks, take the burnt end off and roll cotton on them and make Q-tips, or I'll strip old sheets and make bandages. I'll sharpen the needles, that kind of stuff. But that's how I ended up coming and spending every last minute I could at Meherazad. And marketing day. Oh, and then eventually, because I earned their trust, and because Goher had showed me how to shop through the dispensary and what to do, and we had to see the magistrate or what to bring into the trust, or that kind of stuff, they started trusting me to come into town on my own. It wasn't all the time, but maybe once a month I'd go in on my own so Goher could just rest. And eventually, when there was work in Pune, I would go to Pune and I would stay at Bindra House with Gaimai, who was Eruch's mother. I never met his father, but Maryann was there and Manu, his sister. And they had the sweetest little helper in the house. And I didn't mind staying at Bindra House, and they would tease me, especially Maryann and Gaimai. So for breakfast, they'd come get me out, quick, take a bath. And there would be a whole loaf of toast, because Gaimai sent for fresh bread every morning. And she knew Americans liked toast. So Gaimai would sit there, and over the open flame, she'd toast both sides of this bread. And she'd stuff me with a whole loaf of white bread. And it wasn't as big as our loaves of bread here. It was maybe 10 slices. But she also spent money to buy jam. So it was always, she would say, come, Mara bacha, come, auna, kauna. That means come here, it's time to eat. Toast, butter, jam, she'd say. I mean, it was just so sweet. And then we'd walk they had a little dog named Mustang. So I'd walk with Maryann and he would greet everybody and this and that. And then he'd tell me all these stories. So also Gaimai, the first night I stayed at Indra house, she said, your bed is in the back of the room. And it was a huge room that was probably 40 feet by 20 feet, maybe even bigger. But it was separated by these big not go downs. What is it? Armoires, where, you know, you open the cupboard and that's where you hang your clothes and there's little drawers in it because you didn't want the rats to get in. So they made rooms using these armoires. So my little room, there was a bed that I had to pass, and then there was 2 armoires across like this, and I'd cross like this, and my bed was right here in the corner. And I noticed that the photo that Baba told Gaimai that she was in, where Baba is sitting in the chair with the garland and the cap on his head, had been taken out of the kitchen area and was put on the wall above my bed. And I thought, oh, how sweet. She told me the whole story about Baba and how she had given it to the smart guy, the professor. Anyway, and Baba said,
Gunny.
yes, Gunny.
Gunny.
And so I thought, how sweet, she's putting that above my bed where I'm sleeping. So in the middle of the night, all of a sudden I'm waking up and my bed's just shaking like this. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And then it stops. And then maybe 15, 20 minutes later. So I'm thinking, oof, what is going on here? So I'm nervous because I don't, well, who's shaking my bed? There's nobody there. So at breakfast time, I sat down and Gaimai turns to me and she says, I hope the ghost didn't bother you last night. There's a ghost in this house? It bothered me many times. My bed was shaking. Maryann starts laughing. And I said, why is that funny to you? And Manu said, oh, Vesta, we're teasing you. It's the big lorries that cross from town. And they're so filled with things that it shakes the road. And in that corner, the bed shakes. But that's how, I mean, I just love Persian sense of humor. I'm not saying Hindus or other people don't have it, but there's something special about that Persian sense of humor and they're joking. So that was just so sweet. Oh, and in Pop's house, I woke up one time with drip, drip, drip on my forehead. And I look up on the top of my mosquito net and there's a rat pissing on me.
Oh, no.
And it's like in the middle of the night. And I didn't know what to do. So I sat up and I pushed it and then the rat went out and I don't know where the rat went. But then I had to get up and bathe because I've got rat piss on me. And rats in India are filthy. They're not like rats on my hill that live on a hillside and there's no trenches of poop or anything. I mean, they don't have disease. And another time I awoke and I would lay on my left side, my pillow's here, and my mosquito net was maybe 6 inches from my face because you never wanted to put your arm or any body part close to the mosquito net because the mosquito could bite you through the mosquito net. So I open my eyes and I'm just getting ready to open the mosquito net to go up and to go potty, and it must have been 3 or 4 in the morning. And as I opened my eyes, we always had a lantern in the room, just like they did at Meherazad, so that you never got up in the dark, because you always wanted to look out for rats and snakes and that type of thing. But
Right.
also, cockroaches are called kasaris, right, Goher?
Yes.
Goher, they're called kasari? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
And the kasaris in India can be as big as a Vienna sausage.
Yeah.
And you didn't want
Oh,
to step on them because nothing was worse than hearing the crunch of
Oh,
the kasari on the floor.
That's right.
And usually the lantern would keep the cockroaches down to a minimum, but you needed to know where you were stepping.
Yeah.
But so this night I opened my eyes to get up and go pee-pee, and there, looking at me, was a cobra. It had
Oh,
wound
yeah.
itself up on the leg of my bed. Arnavaz had a bed made for me because the beds were so short and I was 6 feet tall at the time. So she had a nice big bed made for me and a special mattress. So it was a wood leg. And so it had wrapped itself around the leg and then up on the arm, the little metal piece of my mosquito net was just looking straight at me, fanned out like this. So that was one thing that happened. And I had to wake Pat up and have her get she went out into the yard and started yelling for, I forget the word we used, for the person who would come get the snake, even though it's in the middle of the night. All the men got up and came to get the snake out and to make sure it was dead so it wouldn't come into their house or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm almost done. I can tell this stuff another time. These
Yeah,
are
yeah,
I can-
Vesta. A lot of people have dropped out because they're tired. I'm losing consciousness, but
yeah.
I love hearing all this. It's
Well,
yeah,
I can stop here.
yeah, that's good. That's
because-
good. Well,
Yeah, and then I can have another thing. I used to have Baba dreams all the time, but I
yeah,
always had to tell Arnavaz and Goher about them before I could tell Mehera. But Mehera would always ask me, "You had a Baba dream?" Because she rarely dreamed of Baba.
yeah.
So anyway, that can be a whole other talk.
Oh
because-
yeah.
So
No,
anyway,
no.
so are there any questions or anything?
Oh my
Brad
God.
and Hunter?
We have many Tuesdays, so good.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
people can leave, but are there any questions?
No, we're just happy to hear you, Vesta.
Yeah.
It's so nice to see all of you. Oh, and Karen. Oh, Karen. J. Baba Karen.
Oh,
Okay.
J. Baba,
Diana.
that's,
Yeah, Diane, thank you for all your sweet messages, Karen. I really appreciate it. It means
Yeah.
a lot to me.
it's great to see you.
this is
And-
like
Yeah,
bedtime stories for us, Rustom.
yes.
Yeah.
This is,
All right. Well, I'll let you all go. But no, are there any questions or does anybody want to talk about anything?
no, this is Maryann, New York. This is Maryann, New York City. And
Okay.
it feels like I'm in your living room in a circle of friends.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
want to thank you so much because I live alone. And
Me too.
I don't have, people coming in. So I just want to thank you because that's the awareness I have that I'm with you there, all of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's why I like to see faces. I was telling Betty today that I've had no one in my house since on the Tithi of 2020,
Mhm.
except for my nephew and his wife and Gloria and Ernesto, who have saved my life. I wouldn't be here without them. So it's like you're all visiting or I'm visiting you. So it's nice. I really appreciate it.
I have to say, Vesta, you are a great storyteller,
Yes,
Yeah.
you are.
raconteur.
Yeah.
Real, and I don't think I went off the rails today, did I?
No, you're
you're great.
wonderful.
Yeah.
You mean there are rails? Where are the rails?
There you go. Yeah, like I'm not very good with boundaries, but anyway. No, it's the chemo and the radiation poison still comes up. And so my head has sometimes trouble holding my thought or finding a word. And like I was telling somebody, I can see the word written on a chalkboard and I can read the letters to you and then you tell me the word. I mean, that's sometimes how I'd have to do it. Or a memory would come up when I'm talking and boom, I'm off the rails.
I'm so
Going east
glad
instead
they're
of north.
recording all this. It's wonderful to hear your stories.
Yeah.
I think
Well-
there's a lot more to come, huh, Vesta?
Well, yeah, there's about 30 that I've told, enough for Betty. She's taken notes so that I know. So I have a recurrence of the disease, unfortunately. And we're waiting to see how bad it is or what I'm facing. I was hoping to get the results of the PET scan today, but it's probably going to be tomorrow. So I'm feeling an urgency about saying things so that I don't die with all this inside of me, because I think it gives you a different feeling of the ashram and the mandali, and they're just like us. They're no different than us, except, they were,
Except they're different.
they got torture from the avatar differently than we did. But I mean, they were just so natural, like your family, your aunts and your uncles. So anyway. So I don't want to die with all this in me. In fact, I don't want to die, quite frankly. So keep good thoughts tonight.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Very
yes,
And
yes.
thank
yes,
you
thank
for all
you.
your love and support. Oh my God, it's made all the difference in the world. So
One
anyway,
raised hand, Donna and Ken. Can we ask that before we go? Donna,
Yeah.
and- yeah?
Hi,
Yeah.
Vesta. This is Ken. I put up a picture from Meherazad in 1975, July, which is the last time I think I saw you. The only time I've seen you, and you wouldn't remember, but I think you're so focused on the woman Mondley that you didn't pay attention to the few wandering pilgrims.
Well, I
But,
tried to be invisible so I wouldn't upset anybody. I was all, it's Monty told me later that every day when they were with Baba, they wondered if he was going to send them away. Remember, Elizabeth was sent, Kitty was sent, Katie was sent to Bombay, Arnavaz didn't live at Meherazad, Rano was sent. They were all sent away. So they had this, I don't want to use the word fear, but it was a concern that, oh my God, was this the day that Baba was going to send them away?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't until a couple of years later, I was being chastised for something, whatever. And I said, please don't send me away. Please don't send me away. And Monty said, what, you're afraid we're going to send you away? I said, oh yeah. She says, oh, good. Now you know what we felt living with Baba. Even with Baba, every day we thought, is this the day he's going to send us away? But I was terrified that I would lose my connection with Meherazad or the ability to be with those people. And so I didn't want to cause any problem. I didn't want to do the wrong thing or get into trouble. And there were some pilgrims who figured out that I might have been staying there, but I always was circuitous. And unless somebody was ill, some people came and went several times to India on pilgrimage and didn't know I was at Meherazad. In fact, is Karen still on? One of the things that one of the things that Barbara McReynolds told me is that when she was coming and going to India, and I remember when she would bring glasses from LA Eyewear for the Mandali, especially Eruch and them, and they love these glasses that she brought. But she told me, she said, you were in India then? I said, I never saw you. And I said, good, that's the way I wanted. Because I didn't want any, I just didn't want a problem. But Ken, if you have a photograph, I have very few photographs. I maybe have a dozen or so photographs. If you have a photograph of me, will you send it to me?
no, I don't have one that you're in. I have the one of the woman Mondali that I got
Oh.
from the website
Oh.
where I'm in the background. But you were you were hard to miss at 6 foot and blonde and young and
Oh, Vesta.
but yeah.
Uh-oh.
Who's it? Said, huh? Tony had the pictures, but I remember I think I shared some pictures of us in 1975. And I'll send them again to you if you want.
I think you did, but I was in the middle of radiation and
I'll send it again.
chemotherapy. And so sick, it's on an email and I didn't have the ability to save them properly.
Don't worry, I will send them again, the pictures.
Bless you.
But I remember I was there when you arrived with Laura and Maryann. So I remember. That was a highlight. I recorded that in my diary back then. So.
Oh, okay.
So there.
One of these days, if you like funny stories and to laugh, there's stories of me knocking out guys, not only at Shindy Village, but in the bazaar that would grab my breast when I was on the bike or my butt, or try and pull me out of the rickshaw, and I just stop the rickshaw, boom. But there's one of a mango wallow that's hysterical, and another one with a guy on his bike that tried to pull me out of the rickshaw. So I'll tell those stories. You'll laugh your domes off.
I wanted to ask you, did Raquel Welch's brother ever tell her about Baba?
Oh yeah, she's been to Marymount.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But she, from what I understand, she never believed in Baba, but had respect for him. And Jimmy is now in an assisted living facility and he's got severe dementia, but now that I've been able to sit up, I try and send him a postcard that you're being loved, J. Meher Baba, just so that because he's probably at the end stage of his life, so, and he was so important in bringing me to Baba.
Yeah.
Oh, just Jamie Newell. Jamie Newell stayed with me in 2010 with my mom and me because he was giving a concert and he wanted to go up to the Pickfair estate. And I said, why do you want to go there? He says, well, Baba was there in 32 with Mary Pickford and
Douglas Fairbanks.
yeah, all those people, you know.
Yeah.
All those people.
And so I said, well, I used to live around the corner. And when we drove up Benedict Canyon and went down San Ysidro to turn right on Pickfair, I said, well, I used to live there. That's where I heard Baba's name. And that was the corner house that was like 500 feet away from the gate of Pickfair. And he said, oh my God. He said, do you realize this was 2010? So 32, 42, 52, 62, 72, 82, 92, 02. So like 38 years or whatever it was earlier, he said when Baba passed that house, he had to look at the house and say, Vesta's gonna recognize me, hear my name. And I said, you know what? I used to run and walk all along Pickfair, and I used to hang out at the gate and look at the house, and I'd say, that's where the sitting room is. How would I know that? Oh, that's the dining room, or that's da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. So there was a connection there. But I never realized it because I didn't know that Baba went to Pickfair. I didn't even know about his 32 visit. I was really ignorant other than, you know, what I learned, you know, picked up at Meherazad or whatever. So when you think about it, if we all look back on our life, if you really pay attention to things that happen, you can see how he prepared to drop you at his feet, you know, when it was your time. So my story is no different than anybody's. And look and see what your family was doing during World War II.
Yeah.
Because Baba chose your family to help him manage World War II. Whether you were fighting the Nazis or whatever. But I mean,
Yeah.
that's a connection with Baba.
Vesta,
All right.
Oh,
Go ahead.
mwah. Thanks so
Jay
much.
Baba.
Hey, Baba.
Yeah,
Hey, Baba, Vesta.
we
Thank
haven't-
you,
Baba.
Hey, Baba.
See you later. Take care. Stay healthy.
Baba.
Avatar there,
From
Baba.
there, Baba. Ki Jai.
He did.
Jai Baba.
Star, Mayor Baba.
He
Ki Jai.
did.
Avatar.
Star, Mayor Baba. Ki Jai.
All right, folks. You
All
folks.
right. Jai Mayor Baba.
Hey, Baba.
Wow. All right.